Hey everyone, welcome back to Ride to Stream. I am Travis, writer, fiction and entertainment. I'm joined always as by Michelle. We are grateful to have you here again. We're talking about Lost, Season 1, Episode 7. This episode is called Moth. Um, Before we introduce Michelle, I do want to tell everyone that this episode does revolve around addiction. So if there are if anyone is dealing with that or knows someone who's dealing with that and that's an issue, please feel free to step away and come back to future episodes. We can even leave some information in the description for anyone who needs support. Uh, but Michelle, thank you for being here. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing all right. How about you?
I'm ready to dive into this episode. There's a lot to unpack with
Yeah.
Charlie's character and um, yeah, it's a heavy episode.
Yeah, it is. We've been dealing with a fair amount of issues in each episode, and this week it is, as you said, addiction and getting off of and kind of detoxing, withdrawal symptoms that Charlie is feeling after he's given his stash over to Locke. So I won't give away too much. I know you're gonna give us a nice lengthy synopsis so that we're all on the same page.
All right, well, I will. If you're okay, go ahead and dive right in.
Sounds good.
Okay. After agreeing to turn over his stash to Locke in the previous episode, this episode, Moth, starts off with Charlie attempting to play his guitar while he's clearly struggling during his detox. Locke encourages Charlie to step away from the cave as fresh air would do him good. Unbeknownst to Charlie, Locke leaves Charlie alone out in the forest when a boar attacks him. After running for his life, Annette captures the boar, and Locke thanks Charlie for being such wonderful bait. Uh, Not cool, Locke, not cool. Charlie asks for his drugs back, and Locke agrees that he will give them back to him if he asks for them 3 times. Locke later in the episode compares Charlie to a cocoon where a moth is trying to break free. He tells Charlie that he could help the moth escape more easily, but it wouldn't be as strong and as capable to survive in the wild. Perhaps John is testing Charlie's previously dulled senses to make sure he's able to take care of himself even when a wild animal is hunting him down. On the flip side, Charlie feels unappreciated and unwanted in any of the tasks associated with their new island life. He's so frustrated that he yells at Jack inside one of the caverns, and then the roof proceeds to cave in, trapping Jack inside while Charlie narrowly escapes. Hurley shouts to Charlie to go get help from the beach and to make sure he tells Kate. Charlie races to the beach, and Michael begins recruiting others to help. And fortunately, Michael's many years in construction makes him most suited to understand where they should dig to try and recover Jack. Jack is alive, but he's pinned down, and the only opening they've created is not very large. Charlie volunteers after he tells Michael that Walt depends on him, much like Sun depends on Jin, and then he doesn't have anyone on the island. It's a sad revelation to Charlie's mindset, but he is able to crawl through the tunnel before it collapses and then lift the boulder off of Jack. He then also has to pop his shoulder back into place after being dislocated, and he's able to identify an exit where he and Jack are able to escape. Now, going back to Charlie's flashbacks, they involve his struggles with the rock and roll lifestyle. And even though he tries to quit the band, his older brother begs him to continue, saying that Charlie is drive shaft and they can't go on without him. His brother's drug use is out of control, and despite agreeing to quit if things get too heavy, Charlie's brother lashes out at him, saying he's drive shaft, and Charlie is a nobody since no one knows who the bass player is. Later, we see Charlie knocking on his brother's door to find he's clean and has a family. Excuse me. Charlie begs his brother to rejoin the band, but refuses and points out that Charlie is still hooked. In a reversal of roles, Charlie lashes out at his brother, saying he never looked out for him. Back to the island, everyone congrats Charlie on saving Jack. He also asks Locke for his drugs back for the third and final time. But when Locke hands it back to him, he tosses them into the fire, leading Locke to say, "I'm proud of you, Charlie. I always knew you could do it." And Charlie notices a moth seemingly emerge from the open fire and fly off into the night sky.
Nicely
There
done.
are some other little tidbits that happen, which we'll get to, but first impressions, Michelle, I know we go through our three question format and we will get to that. But what were your first impressions after watching Moth?
Um, I was a little bit conflicted insofar as that I think this was the first time where I felt like the use of the moth might have been uh a little bit forced versus some of the other stories, other episodes. Um, but upon rewatching it, I got a bit more out of it the next time, just kind of watching more closely, um, really paying more attention to the story that was unfolding in Charlie's flashbacks, and looking beyond the moth as more symbolic of a transformation, and the moth's struggle and how being able to get out of the cocoon is a signal of strength, overcoming adversity, growing from the challenges. And once I looked at it a bit more in that light, upon reflection, I feel like it worked for me and it didn't feel quite so contrived. Um, because the moth shows up in the cave, and kind of helps Charlie to figure out that there must be an exit. Um,
Right.
and then, of course, at the very end, with the moth kind of coming up out of the flames like a phoenix rising, to live another day. I think maybe it was the use of the moth in maybe the cave. Maybe it's just like it was nice to kind of, give the story when Charlie's having struggles and Locke conveys his story to him. And then at the end, maybe there was just too much moth. I don't know, the
Yeah.
first first time around, but I did, as always, enjoy the story and felt that, you know, we get more tidbits along the way that helps us to kind of understand a little bit more about the characters, about the island, but leaves us with a lot more questions, which is kind of the structure and formula that is lost.
Yeah.
What about you on rewatching now for probably, sixth, seventh time?
Um, I I don't know if I remembered it this way when I watched it initially. But I remember I watched it twice this past week. Um, and I just remember thinking of how cold and calculating Locke is in this episode. I mean, he has a very dry demeanor overall. But, you know, leading Charlie to be bait, and
Yeah.
then kind of being, hey, you make wonderful bait. You're great job. Like, I understand what I guess he's doing in that scene, but it's such a tactless thing to like. It just I can understand why Charlie would be so, you know, lost in that moment where he's like, okay, the one guy who's says he's wanting to help me kind of uses me as bait, you know, can I really rely on this person? So it was an interesting. I took that away. That I was. I don't know if I noticed how direct Locke was in my previous watches before this week. Um, but I mean, Charlie's, you know, Dominic Monaghan's performance is great here. You get to see these flashbacks where, he's on drugs. You get to see him where he's clean. And, the scene where his brother is begging him to not quit the band and saying that hey, Charlie, you're a drive shaft. They're not going to do the concert or the tour without you. And they could go on tour, and he tells Charlie the complete opposite, that no one even knows who you are. It made me wonder, like, what the reality really was. Is Charlie drive shaft? Like, is he the face, or was his brother just boosting his ego to make him come back? I can't remember. I know I've seen the series several times, but at this point, I don't even remember what's true. Um, but it's such an awful reality, and you see his reaction, like after his brother leaves the locker room or whatever, wherever they are, after missing rehearsal, and
Mhm.
Charlie's just sitting there with the drugs in his hands, and he's like crying and so upset about everything, and um, so yeah, it's a very um and taking, I know we talked about this offline, seeing how he was on the island on drugs, where he was kind of squirrely a little bit, or high, and nothing seemed to phase him, with especially episode one. I still remember the flying parts falling behind him and not even phasing him a bit. And then you see the complete opposite, where he's struggling with detox. um you know we've talked online where I know someone who you know, has gone through this struggle, and it's obviously it's not the same being a fictional show, but kind of having that perspective of knowing what this character is going through, it's hard to watch um, with that mindset.
Yeah, particularly, his feeling of uselessness, coming to terms with his value. I think what was kind of interesting to me is the fact that I felt that um, Charlie had the foundation of a good relationship with Jack. So I do find it kind of interesting that, you know, he would seek assistance from Locke, father figure. But I was also thinking as were talking, the fact that part of what bridged the gap is Charlie's love for music, and the fact that Locke keyed into the fact that one, he knew who Charlie was, and talked to him kind of on the same level, so that they had common ground. And I'm wondering if that's more of why he ended up pairing with Locke to kind of help him. I'm going to say like his what is it in like AA, it's your mentor. Is that right? Is that the right word? I can't remember. A
Yeah, I
sponsor.
think so.
It's
Sponsor,
sponsor.
yeah.
Um, that Locke would be end up being his sponsor, so to speak, versus Jack, who would have also helped him out. Charlie finds out that Jack already knew, was reading the signs that he was, withdrawing from drugs, and that Jack would have helped him.
Yeah.
And the fact that Charlie, said, well, you would have, seen me as, a junkie, that I was useless. And Jack immediately keys in, you're not useless. You've never been useless. Um, And, Jack goes further and says, I could have helped you, but it's a case of, I think that Charlie looks up to Jack, and wants validation from Jack. And that's why I think he kind of ended up working with Locke. Um, and that isn't to say that Jack would have done, well, he would have done it differently than Locke. Locke is a no nonsense type of person. He's also of a generation where I think, you pull the band-aid off and you deal with it, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, um, Locke's approach is interesting, but it also is is a way of getting Charlie to kind of deal with years of this buildup of baggage that he's carrying around about his value and how his whole identity was wrapped up in drive shaft that doesn't exist any longer. And now we know he's just coming back from a conversation with his brother who's actually gotten his life turned around. And now, um, even though Liam wants to help him, that's not what Charlie wants. Charlie is still
Yeah.
about the music, that's his core, is about the music. And we even find that out in the prior episode. Um, I don't even remember what your question was at this point, but I just feel that um Charlie needed to kind of face a lot of things.
Yeah.
Similar to what I know, when we've talked offline, uh, about, people that we know that are dealing and struggling that we can help. But at the end of the day, the strength is going to come from that person. And them being able to rely on themselves and have value, see their value, then
Yeah.
they're able to actually come through that struggle. And I think that's where I think the moth analogy worked quite well and wrapped up nicely for Charlie.
And yeah, and like you said, Jack, you know, identifies Charlie to kind of counter his feeling of uselessness. Like it's like, dude, you just crawled through a tunnel to rescue me, you know, help lift this boulder off me. He popped his shoulder back into place. Like Jack identifies that immediately, um, to kind of, you know, subside those negative thoughts. So I guess we can pivot here, and we'll start with our first of three questions, because I do think there are a lot of different scenes in this episode that could potentially be favorites or interesting. Do you have a favorite or most interesting scene from this episode?
Yeah, that was kind of hard. I mean, I think I think I kind of have three. Um, but obviously the exchange between Locke and Charlie, the fact that it starts out, Charlie's kind of looking on as everyone's in the cave and they're trying to pull rocks out. And he goes to Locke, and Dominic did an absolutely phenomenal job acting, I felt, with this section. Coming up to Locke, talking about what's happened to Jack. And then, of course, Terry O'Quinn, great actor, is like, well, is anybody helping him? Well, yeah, there's a lot of people. So why aren't you there? You know, and, just that exchange. And you can see how, again, the subtlety of change in the face that Charlie has to face the emotions, because he knows he's guilty. He raised his voice because earlier he just said, well, we were just talking. Well, no, you were
Yeah,
yelling at Jack. You were
yeah,
pretty pretty pissed. And so, he's got potentially the death of somebody on his consciousness now. And just seeing all that kind of flip around in his brain, and then being confused by the story about the moth. But how deadpan Locke is about, you're not here, Charlie, to tell me about Jack, are you?
Yeah.
And Charlie's like, I kind of feel like he's hit absolute rock bottom at that point, because he's dealing with the withdrawal. He's dealing with that Jack may have died in the cave. Um, he doesn't like dealing with all of these emotions, and yet he has to in order to grow from them. So I really like that scene. I also like later when, like we were just talking about Jack and Charlie talking, and how Charlie says, well, this feels like a confessional, kind of claustrophobic and things like that.
Yeah.
And, and I really like that exchange. Like it was like this experience helps solidify their relationship and makes it a stronger relationship, and how um Jack and agrees that they're neither one of them are saints, which kind of harkens back to, Sawyer and all of his little nicknames, Saint Jacko.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
so I'm like, yep, it's all cyclical and all bounces to different stuff, different narrative beats. And then the third one that I'll just touch on is Saeed and Kate talking about trying to understand how they survived. And Saeed seems to be a very logical person, and he's really questioning how they survived based on what the crash, and the cartwheel, and the fact that, the tail broke off and a lot of things. So, Saeed's remembering things and is like thinking, how did we survive? So it again kind of brings up this question of like, made me think, well, is this, are they alive? Or are they in some purgatory or something? It just kind of like cued me into a little bit like, yeah, how did they survive? They pretty much unscathed,
Yeah.
and while they did have some scratches and things, there were, a couple of people that we saw that, the guy's leg was trapped, and um, so people were either alive or they were dead or very near death. Like I'm thinking of the marshal, he was going to pass on. Um, so it's just kind of interesting that, while at the same time, Saeed explaining to Kate that he doesn't trust Sawyer.
Yeah.
And Kate says, well, who does trust him? Nobody does. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but she insists that she can handle him. So I just thought those were kind of really interesting key scenes, that just kind of loop on themselves and probably have a lot more foreshadowing of things to come, and just kind of all the things that are packed in what seems like innocuous scenes that make up
Yeah.
the entire episode. What about you?
Yeah. When I think of the exchanges with Locke and Charlie, they almost seem like it's just one journey.
Hmm.
Um, and before I get to probably my favorite, I will, or most interesting, I will say Locke's description with the moth and the cocoon, um, and Charlie being like, I don't know what's in there, a butterfly,
Yeah.
um, and him being completely bewildered, like, why are you telling me about this cocoon, dude? And as Locke is explaining, like the moth struggling to get out, to survive. And you see the expression change as Charlie then focuses on the cocoon and what Locke is trying to tell him about himself.
Hmm.
Because he asks, "Why are you doing this? Why don't you just throw it in the fire?" And Locke's like, "Well, that means you wouldn't have any choice."
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's a very compelling scene. The one I landed on, and we really haven't talked about the other little tidbits, but Saeed, Kate, and Boone make this plan to put three devices at different points of the island to triangulate the French woman's signal's power source.
Yeah.
Um, and then when the cave-in happens, Boone he tells you something about him. He rushes into action to help Jack, but he tells Shannon, "Okay, you need to do this since I can't." And then we see Kate do something similar when Sawyer comes to join along, even though he was going to tell Kate about Jack's situation. And she does the same thing. So my scene is when they start triangulating and Saeed is looking at the walkie or the radio and and he's so focused on it. He's so excited that they might figure out where this power source is. And then he gets cracked on the back of the head with some type of wood thing. And he falls on his face and there's blood dripping down the side of his face. And it's almost like that scene is almost just like, oh, it happened because there's so much focus on Charlie and Jack and the cave-in and but that scene is like, well, what's going on with that? Which that will be part of my third question. So we can focus on that. But before we get to that, I'll go ahead and pivot to our second question, which is, do you have a most interesting favorite character from this episode?
Um, I'm gonna have to say Charlie, just because we had so much on Charlie. And I really do feel that he had the most growth within the episode. I mean, if we're talking about hero's journey, you know, prior to this episode, we think everything's okay, or well, there's something off. There's something in him that will require him to go on some sort of journey, face something. And I really feel like they really did kind of a hero's journey for him. And he's, come out the other side as he flicks the baggie of drugs into the fire, with Locke looking on. So yeah, I went with Charlie. I felt like he had the strongest storyline. And we got to learn so much about him. So yeah, he was.
Yeah, I would say the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
Charlie just it's a great performance. And seeing the evolution with the flashbacks of how he got to where he is on the island. Um, Up to the final scene where he tosses the drugs into the fire. I think is I think this episode is done really well. They frame it in a way where, you know, even with Jack being caved in,
Mhm.
you know, the center, the focus of that is Charlie crawling through a tunnel. I guess similarly like a moth breaking through a cocoon,
Oh yeah,
um,
yeah, that's true.
and and even with Jack being hurt, he's trying to um relate or
Hmm.
understand that, Charlie doesn't have to be alone. And so I think they did a great job um coming full circle. And just highlighting like where Charlie was during the first few episodes to the awful pale, sweating, painful positions that he was, where Jack has to cover from to Hurley to say he has the flu. So yeah, I don't even know if there's someone who I would mention it. I don't even know if there's anyone that I would say is close to Charlie, because I think in previous episodes you could maybe pick a few, like, oh, maybe one of these, but I think Charlie's kind of the lead. If there was anyone, maybe it's Locke and the way he kind of tries to get Charlie to identify.
Sorry. Had a couple of kitties having to announce themselves in the room.
It's all right. What happens?
Yep.
Um, so I'll third question, where the first two questions are most interesting scene, favorite character, and the third is more specific to this episode, where when Saeed is trying to triangulate the power source and he's knocked unconscious, who would you list as a pool of potential suspects as the person who attacked Saeed?
You know, I naturally Sawyer comes to mind. Um, but I don't think he doesn't, other than being the resident bad guy, um, I don't think he has a lot to lose if they leave the island. And obviously we can account for a few of the others. So, um, I mean, I don't see like Curly doing it. So that would naturally, I'm kind of thinking Locke would potentially because he'd have the most to lose,
Yeah,
and is probably the least willing to want to go back to civilization. Kate's already shown that she wants to get off the island. I mean, because she's willing to stay down on the beach where they've got the fire, and she truly believes that, well, there's some reason why she doesn't want to go to the cave, but um, yeah, I mean, I think that just kind of naturally leaves Locke based on the main characters that we've seen
yeah,
because June and Sun are there, Michael's there, Walt's there, these Hurley are all in the cave, Shannon's down on the beach, Claire's not going to do that. I mean, I don't see why she'd have any reason to want Saeed not figure out where the source is coming from.
right.
So that means I'm thinking Locke. As you were talking about Saeed uh getting conked on the head from behind and not knowing who it is, kind of took me back to um the television show Dallas. Did you ever watch Dallas? I don't know. It could be a
I
little
watched
old.
snippets here and there, but I know the big question was always like, who shot JR?
Yeah. And there was a show. Um, okay, so that's the 80s. I'll date myself here a bit when that was out. And so we didn't have the internet to, give us the whole behind the scenes. So I can remember seeing the behind the scenes later, how the show was trying to make sure that nobody knew who shot JR because they didn't want it to be leaked before it was revealed the next season who it was. Um, so what they did is that every character had to uh do that scene where they were shooting JR, including Larry Hagman. And he shoots himself basically because he played JR. And it always starts with I think the shot of the gun, and then it kind of pans up and reveals, right? So when it came to JR, he shoots, it pans up and he kind of like looks down at the gun and looks forward like, I don't, how would I shoot myself if I'm what? This doesn't make sense. So I could
Yeah,
almost see the show kind of like in orders that people wouldn't figure out, the actors themselves even, um, that they all had to do the scene. Um,
Yeah.
and I just thought that that would have been really funny. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if they did. I'm not looking. But I just thought that the scene, made me think of the Who Shot JR. I'm sure we'll find out eventually. But my thought is that it's probably Locke.
Yeah, I can't remember what my initial thoughts are, but I know in my brain I would have been like, okay, Sawyer is setting off a firework. Kate's back in the cave.
Yeah.
Um, Michael, Sun, Jin, Boone are in the cave. So Locke seems like the only one with a lot, and because I don't know where Charlie is at this point. I guess he's with Jack at this point.
He's with Jack, yeah, and in the either they're in their little cave confessional or they're digging their way out. Don't know. But everything looks like it seems to happen 5 o'clock hour around about the same time.
Yeah. So yeah, it does seem like that's the only logical person.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't remember if that person is revealed or not. So I'm I'm ready to get back into it and see what happens.
And see if we're right.
Yeah. So um yeah, so this is definitely, heavier episode. I do think they handle the subject matter well. Um, are there any other points from the episode that stand out to you worth mentioning?
It kind of played well into um Shannon giving Boone a bunch of crap when he tries to explain, I need you to do something very important. Um, probably if he would have framed it, hey, Saeed and Kate and Jack, this is really important. She wouldn't have given him so much shit about it. But
Yeah.
obviously, she was like, yes, I know what I need to do. I got it. But she was playing the dumb blonde. And I thought, well, that kind of played well. Um, but it also took a step back from her, I think her character growth. So, I am kind of hoping that, um, I think she's a bit more interesting when she's finding her strength, um, instead of being the typical blonde. Um,
Yeah, because when Saeed lets off his fireworks, she has her back to where she's supposed to be looking. And it's her friend or whoever she's talking to that points it out to her, and she's like, "Oh crap!" And she
yeah,
races to so yeah, a bit of a lighthearted, comical moment that's different from her going on this trek to um, figure out what this French person is saying. So, kind of a tale of two characters in this moment. And I feel like that her and Boone are kind of dealing with that same dichotomy of like who they are versus maybe who they want to be.
yeah,
So it'd be interesting to see how they navigate moving forward.
yeah. The other thing I would say is, obviously, we would be remiss to not have a few words about Sawyer. And the fact that, Jack is leaving the beach. And of course, here comes Sawyer. He's like, well, I'll take that tent. And Kate says that he's such a parasite. He's always taking, never giving. And she's pretty brutal with him in saying that, nobody cares about you. It's so interesting how we sort of have similar dialogues. Like she's telling him, nobody's missing you. You don't mean anything to anybody. And later she says, who trusts Sawyer anyway? Nobody trusts Sawyer. So he
Yeah.
continues to be kind of, this bad guy. But she never said please, but he did give her the battery. And then when Charlie came to the beach to say Jack's been trapped, and he's Sawyer tells Charlie, I know where they went. I'll go let her know. And of course, my immediate thought, just like everybody else, is like, Sawyer's gonna F this up. And
Yeah.
because he's got his own agenda. And I do feel that when he met up with Kate and Saeed, I do think he was going to tell her.
Yeah.
And she was immediately, what are you doing here? Why are you even here? Why do you think that she tells him, I don't know why you think I would have any interest, anything you have to say. And you can kind of see it kind of, whoop,
Yep.
here comes the nasty Sawyer who is not going to tell her about Jack. I think he was going to. I think he
Yeah, I agree.
actually turning maybe a leaf for a moment or something. But I do think that I think he was going to take the opportunity to do the right thing and let her know. Um, and then when she was so accusatory, he's like, "Oh, right, fine, Miss B. I will play right into what you think I am, even though that's not what I was going to do." So
Yeah.
I think I can't wait to find out more about Sawyer because I think he really is one of those characters that there's a lot going on underneath, and I think we're going to find out a lot about him that's going to be very telling to where he's at. And I think the face that we're seeing is not, it's a jaded face. And I don't think it's it's a jaded face. It's a survivalist face in a different way from Locke. Um, and I think that that's not who I think he really is. I think,
Yeah.
there's a lot of circumstances that he is what he is. And I think, obviously being on an island, yeah, he immediately goes into survival mode and gathers things. But he's also shows that he's willing to give stuff up, and barter and this and that. And I think that if you didn't have him doing some of that stuff, you might be in a worse situation than if he hadn't collected stuff. I just think that there's probably used to what he's done, and I think he's got a value that people just haven't seen yet. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we t touched on previously, like he doesn't necessarily know how to be nice or
yeah,
part of the community. So, him wanting to do the right thing with telling them about Jack, it's there. And then he just kind of leans back into that solo mode where he's like, I'm just gonna benefit myself and do what I can to survive.
yeah,
So,
yeah. And I think that, when you're telling a story, you have to have somebody that kind of represents and balances the good with the bad, the light and the dark. And since we didn't really, other than the fact that we ended up seeing a small boar coming after um Charlie, we really didn't have anything more about the island being mysterious, other than at the very end when Saeed is hit from the back of the head.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that Sawyer has to continue to be that kind of asshole for a while, until there's something else that kind of replaces it and helps to balance. Because I mean, I think that's how good stories run. You've got got your hero, but you've also got, your bad guy. You got to have a good bad guy. And so
Yeah.
I think Sawyer stands in for kind of that bad guy in the story,
Yeah.
at least for now.
He does it well.
Yes,
He
he
does it well.
yes. I actually think that the actor Josh Holloway probably had a whole lot of fun playing Sawyer. I mean, and I have to say again, um, echo what I said last week. Just the fact that he comes up with these nicknames for people. It was Jacko, that was Saint Jack or Saint Jacko, and and just Saeed is now Muhammad.
Yeah.
And that's not nice. Um,
I should do a running tally of all the nicknames.
I know I'm kind of like, well, let's see. And then Kate is Freckles. I think he calls her Freckles a few times. And so yeah, I think he's got some more nicknames coming.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, I think uh unless there's any other points, I think we
Kind of check in,
done a
huh?
pretty good job highlighting all the amazing points of this episode.
And I'm sure if we missed anything that our viewers and listeners should definitely hop down to the comment section and tell us what your favorite scene was or favorite character of the episode was, or if there was a certain thing that maybe we missed. As always, remember, um, I'm the newbie. So, try to keep spoilers to a minimum or, do a big spoiler alert right at the top. If you're
Done.
talking about episodes like kind of past the first season. Um, so that way I don't find out something that I didn't want to know. So, yeah,
Yeah. So another great episode.
yep,
Everyone who's following along, thank you. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and that will definitely help us move forward with our ride to stream.
definitely. And see everybody next week.